Dan Bublitz Comedy Productions.
You have to pay your dues. That's what's coming up on The Art of Bombing, episode 266.
My friend Dan, he's got a podcast, cause all comics need a podcast, and nobody had a podcast called The Art of Bombing. So Dan went out and bought a tape deck. Who knows why he bought a tape deck? Now podcasts don't get played on tape decks, but Dan is from the 80s. So hey there, all you funny jerks, come talk to Dan about your work. Tell him all about your worst times. It's The Art of Bombing.
Welcome to an all-new episode of The Art of Bombing. I am your host, Dan Bublitz Jr. With me, as always, is my co-host, producer, and cohort, Josh Shirley. How are you doing this week?
Oh, fantastic. I got drunk the other night.
Oh, did you? Oh, you got drunk? Woo-hoo. You know, that's great because we can share drunk stories because I, too, got a little inebriated over the weekend.
But have you ever woke, like, maybe this is just for me in my 40s, but like, so all 3 decades, 20s, 30s, and 40s, I've like woken up the next day in the same clothes. You know, like I've done, like, obviously the only time it's ever happened in my 40s is what I'm about to tell you. But it's now happened in my 40s as well. Now, here's the difference. I was wearing a name tag.
You were wearing a name tag.
That's right.
And you woke up in your clothes from the night
before.
before.
I woke up in my clothes, and there was a name tag stuck to it. Like, I was at a party the night before, and I was like, that's the difference when you are 40 and you pass out in your clothes, is you're going to have a name tag on.
Was it your name tag? That's the real question.
Yeah. Ooh, there you go.
Because that's what I'm like, well, yeah, waking up with a name tag, right? That is a 40s thing, but was it your name tag?
Wait a second. Who is Sanjay?
Right, exactly.
And why am I wearing his name tag? What happened last night? And then there's a whole...
The 40s version of The Hangover.
That's exactly right. There's a dead guy somewhere. And I'm like, don't know who he is.
Oh, that's
So that's the difference. Is I'm like, man, like, hello, my name is Josh was on my shirt. So,
that's hilarious.
That's the 40s version of waking up in your clothes. How about your story?
Oh yeah, so I helped my buddy who owns a brewery and who we do shows at, Big Beaver Brewing here in Loveland, Colorado. He asked me if I was free on Saturday to help pour samples. He was part of grilled cheese and mac and beer festival down in Denver. And so what it is, it's just a big, like a event. They have a bunch of food vendors and, beer vendors, and they're all just giving away samples. And then people can vote for their favorites, and then, the people who are, like the breweries and the chefs and things like that can win the awards or whatever. But he asked me if I was free to come help pour at his booth and help sell merch. And I was like, yeah, I'm free. That's cool. I want to go. I get to drink beer, eat mac and cheese and grilled cheese sandwiches all day. Heck yeah, I'm in. Sign me right up. And so I did.
All they needed was some, action figures, and you'd have been there.
I know. It would have been.
No questions asked.
Oh, absolutely. But I went with him, and we got samples too. And because we're a vendor, other vendors are more I guess is courteous the word, or maybe that's not the word, but they're definitely friendlier to other vendors, and they would give you more samples than than probably should be filled. But anyway, right. That being said, yeah, so I spent the day eating mac and cheese, grilled cheese, and drinking beer, and then there was a distillery there that had samples, and so I had some bourbon and vodka and beer, and all day I felt great. I was taking my time, and then we're getting ready to tear down for the day, and I blacked out. Remember the ride home? Because I threw up multiple times. It was really bad. Actually, you talk about waking up in your clothes. I was not in my clothes, thank God, because my clothes were covered in it was not good. Like I went and grabbed my coat in the morning, and it was just covered. And I was like, oh, my God, what did I do last night?
Who's driving you home?
My friend who runs the brewery. I rode with him. So I didn't drive. I was very responsible there. But I did fall out of his truck, and I am feeling it today. And this was Saturday. So
My Lord.
that's how I know I'm 40. 'Cause well, like I said, what was funny about it, though, is that all day I felt fine. It just caught me out of nowhere. I wasn't ready for it. I was like, normal. I was selling merch, doing the stuff I was there to do, talking to people. I wasn't like obnoxiously drunk, and then all of a sudden, boom, just done.
And wham, just ambushed by
Boom.
horribleness.
But
That's insane.
I will say this, one thing that was cool about the day is my buddy's brewery, Big Beaver Brewing, won fan favorite for brewery at the festival. So he took
They were
home an
like,
award.
you got to go to the one with the drunk guy. Because he's insane. He's wearing a name tag. It says Sanjay on it.
Oh, yeah. So it was a good time. I had a good weekend. I didn't do comedy, but it was a good weekend. I got lots of stuff coming up this week. And actually, the stuff that I have coming up this week is with our guest today, who we should introduce. Our guest today is Adam Mamawala, who is a fantastic comedian from New York City. We had a great conversation. We talked about working in colleges, trying to come up in New York and making your way in a big city like that. Lots of fun stuff. But yeah, I'm going to be with him a couple days this week. The day, if you're listening to this, the day it comes out, tonight we're in Vail, Colorado. And then on Sunday, we're going to be in Winter Park, Colorado together. And then over the weekend, I think you can find him at the Denver Comedy Lounge in Denver. So yeah, so he's going to be in the Denver area all week. I'm going to be with him on a few shows. It's going to be a good time.
Yeah, I think if you're out to see Adam Mamawala, you're really going to like Dan as well. Like I think you guys are a good match.
I think so too.
Yeah. So I did a little research, as I always do, and watched some of Adam's stuff. He had his 2017 album, One of the Good Ones. Check that out. And he actually has a bombing story on that he didn't share with us on the show.
Oh, wow.
So he held out on us, Dan.
He did? Oh, man. I'm going to have to give him some. Yeah. I'm going to have to rib him a little bit when we're hanging out this week.
Or the bombing's not good enough for the big one, for the paying crowd, huh?
Yeah, well, maybe that's why. Maybe he's like, well, I already put that out there.
That's right. I can't tell that story. My fans need more.
They need something
I enjoyed
different.
The discussion with Adam was great. Enjoyed every second of it. Super smart guy. A lot of great insights. There's going to be some fun stuff in this.
Oh, absolutely. And I think without further ado, maybe we should just get to this conversation. I will just do a quick announcement, though. Well, not a quick announcement. Just say this. Make sure you stick around for the post-show, the outro, because we are making a big announcement in the outro. So after the conversation, tune into that outro because we got a big announcement. We're making a slight change to the podcast, but I think everybody is going to love what we're about to do. So make sure you stay for that after the show. And without further ado, here's our conversation with Adam Mamawala. Enjoy.
And now it's time for the stand-up soundbite.
I like to start most of my sets by addressing a question that people seem to have about my face. If you are curious about my particular brand of beige, let's go ahead and clear that up right off the top here. If you're curious, my dad is from India, and my mom is a tiny white lady from Wisconsin, which apparently results in a Mexican man. Look, I don't know how genetics work. It's just how my face turned out. I do it. My favorite question people ask me when they find out my dad is Indian is your dad disappointed that you're a comedian? It's both rude and reasonable at the same time. I see some Asian folks here. You understand the question. A lot of Asian parents, they want their kids to be doctors or engineers, and if they're not one of those two professions, they're very disappointed in them. My dad, I give him a lot of credit for this. He is very supportive of what I do. His whole attitude is like, look, I came here from India with nothing so that you and your sister could pursue your dreams. Just promise me, whatever you do, you'll work hard at it, right? Classic immigrant dad attitude, just work hard. It's beautiful. But when we were little, I'll never forget this, he wanted my sister and I to understand the value of hard work so much that he would take us out into the streets every single weekend and make us pick up cans and bottles and then we would exchange them for like 5 cents a piece, and we would split that money, and that was the only allowance we had the entire time we were growing up. So now, when people ask me if my dad is disappointed that I'm a comedian, I'm like, no, because apparently he is preparing me to be homeless. I'm killing it. My parents, they're very supportive. My parents are so supportive of me that I know I'm never going to make it. When has that ever once been the origin story of artistic greatness? Everyone believed in me the whole time. That's not how that works. You need haters, you need doubters. That's not my story. My dad, I swear to God, he shares my stand-up schedule on his LinkedIn. I'm screwed. There's no world in which I'll be a famous comedian with so much love in my life. I just picture myself 20 years from now, people asking, so Adam, how did you get to where you are today? Well, my parents told me that they would love me unconditionally no matter what happened, and I should never let my career define my sense of self-worth. And I guess that is why I manage this Planet Fitness.
It's the art of bombing.
Is your name pronounced the way that it's spelt?
Mm-hmm. Mamawala.
Mamawala.
Very
okay, it is. All right. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, no, thanks for asking.
That's how I've been pronouncing it, but I wanted to. You never know.
People get flustered when they see it, but it's very phonetic.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and I have to say too, it's kind of a fun name to say.
I've heard that. Yeah.
It's fun, and with your first name Adam, it's a really smooth and fun thing to say. Just
one of the go-to say a fun fact about yourself things for me is that I have an A every other letter of my first and last name, which is
I didn't even think about that.
Fairly ridiculous, but yeah.
That's awesome. So you're in New York City. How long have you been in New York? Did you start in New York, or did you move there from somewhere else?
No, I started comedy in New Jersey. So
okay.
I moved. I've been in New York for like 10 years now.
Oh, fun.
It's been a while. So if you include Hoboken, which is like across the water from New York City, I moved there in 2011. So it's been whatever that is, 12 years. But yeah, coming up on 10 years of actually living in New York City. But I started stand up in New Jersey. I grew up in the Chicago area.
Oh, okay.
But I was like a child there, so I wasn't doing stand up.
Yeah. But familiar with the Midwest.
Only in LA do people do stand up as children.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's why they're there. Their parents moved them there so they could get into entertainment. Yeah. And by they, I mean they get their children into entertainment.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I know. I just I have a friend that just moved to New York not too long ago, and we were talking about that. It's trying to get around the city and hit up spots and stuff like tonight, not the day that this releases, but the day that we're recording. You said you have some spots. Where all are you getting up in New York, and what's that like to try to jump around the city?
Yeah, I mean it's so much easier in New York than almost anywhere else because of the fact that as much as people bitch about the subway, like it is a very effective public transportation system. So there have been times in my life, especially in my like earlier hustling, open mic days, where you're doing 4, 5, 6 spots in a day, and it's feasible in a way that I don't think it would be in a lot of other places. Not only because there's not that much going on, but just because everything's so compact. So the places I work most regularly in New York club-wise are Stand Up New York on the Upper West Side and New York Comedy Club, which is they have one location in Gramercy and one in the East Village. So that's where I am usually. Tonight I have a strange combination of shows. At 7:00, I'm performing at a detox facility.
Oh wow!
It's like a private show at a place where people go to dry out. And I've done it. I do it like once a month because it pays pretty good, and it's also early enough that it doesn't really conflict with anything else I'm doing. But it generally turns out to be more of a conversation because you're standing like in a living room basically talking to people who are in some degree of getting themselves cleaned up. So, but they love dark stuff. I feel like when people are at a dark point in their life, they're like, no, don't be weird about it. Like talk about whatever messed up stuff you want to. We're into it. And then I go from there up to East Harlem, and I'm doing like an apartment show up there.
Oh, well, that sounds like you got a fun Friday night tonight. That's for sure.
It will be fun, yeah. And I mean, I think that's what's cool about New York, especially, is that even within one night, you can perform in so many different kinds of places. Like there have been times where I'm at a detox facility, and then I'm performing in a pizza shop and a laundromat, and then also a comedy club.
Yeah, that's great. Now I'm curious with performing at the detox place. Is that how did you stumble into that, or is that kind of how did you find
Pun
it?
intended.
Well, yeah, exactly. Did you just stumble in?
Well, people stumble in, but they try not to stumble out. That's kind of the whole idea.
Exactly.
It's a friend of mine who runs it, and I think it was something that started in LA, which makes a lot of sense. I feel like rehab is like a lifestyle in Los Angeles. Weirdly, I'm like shitting on LA for a lot in the first 5 minutes here, but all that to say, it's something that happens. It's every single Friday at this facility in New York, which it's like a pretty bougie facility. Like every time I'm there, I'm jealous, and it's people at the worst moment of their lives where I'm like, what's the rent here?
Can I get a
so
place?
it's interesting though. It's just two comics. It's just myself and someone else, and you both do 20 minutes, and sometimes it's stand up, and a lot of other times you're it's the same as doing like a small bar show where you have to cleverly work your way in and out of material because it just feels inauthentic to be like, hello, I am not going to acknowledge that I am standing in front of only 4 people and I'm just going to do a polished act. It doesn't feel appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. I could see that. Yeah, it's interesting how the different areas that comedy can take you. Like you said, you can go from performing in a detox facility to headlining clubs around the country, or playing in theaters and everywhere in between.
Yeah, and even I do some hosting as well, and I've done some corporate hosting, and there are times where I'll like host a corporate event in New York in a tuxedo, and then I don't have time to change, so I just go do a spot at a club in a tux. Like I look like that scene from Step Brothers where they're doing the job interview in tuxedos. It's like, what is this guy doing here?
That's amazing. When that happens, do you address it when you go on stage?
You have to.
Or do you
it becomes your whole identity. Like you can't not address it, or it feels just as weird as not addressing that you're talking to 4 people in a rehab facility. Like
absolutely.
I think it would just be it would actually be kind of funny to just go up and never say anything about it. But usually it just becomes my whole set.
Yeah, that's great. I did that one time, not wearing a tuxedo, but it was part of a gag where I was doing a show for an ugly Christmas sweater show, and the show had a premise. It was like one of those shows where you go up and you do a sober set, and then you go get intoxicated with whatever it is. And this particular, I don't do a lot of drugs. I don't do drugs. I drink. So my mine was drinking, so I had to go get drunk. But I planned it out so that I had an ugly Christmas sweater drawn on my chest. So when I went back for the drunk set, I just took off my shirt. I had like a zip up.
You went full Bert Kreischer?
Yeah, exactly. Like way before probably he was doing that. But I had an ugly Christmas sweater in Sharpie all over my chest, and then I didn't say anything about it. I just went into my normal set.
Do you know who Matt Ruby is?
I don't think so.
So he's a New York guy, but he recorded a special that I think is on YouTube, and I'm forgetting what it was called. It's like some sort of clever pun-based name. But basically the concept was that he recorded 4 different sets. One, he was drunk. One, he was high, like on weed. The other, he was on mushrooms.
Oh, wow.
And then the last one, he was sober. And the idea was just to like see how his performance changed based on what he was on. I haven't watched it, but I was talking to him when he was recording it, and I thought it was a pretty inventive idea. That's really interesting. I wrote down the name. I'm gonna have to check that out, because that definitely would be interesting to watch. Because as performers, your performance can definitely change. I know. I don't for sure perform under the influence of anything, because for me, it just it's not that I have it. I've done like theme shows where I went up stoned, and I did that. I like that the worst. For me, being that sounds horrible, and trying to perform was the worst, because like everything was slowed down, and
You don't feel
Yeah,
sharp?
I'm not. By the way, I did a quick Google search. Substance is what it's called. Substance
okay,
by Matt
cool.
Ruby. If anybody listening wants to check it out. But yeah, I'm not a weed guy at all. I have material about this exact thing. But the idea of performing high is horrifying. Like the only times I have even remotely enjoyed being high was in a very controlled environment where I'm like by myself or with someone I trust and or love. The idea of being high at a concert, it sounds horrifying to me.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I like I said, I'm the same. I don't like because you're.
I don't have a brain for it.
No, I don't either. I
Yeah.
everything slows down. I don't like. And maybe it's because for me, maybe I have a control issue. I don't know because I feel like I don't
Same.
have control of certain things. And when I drink, I can drink a lot of alcohol and I can get pretty smashed and still. I'm still pretty controlled. Like I have to be very, 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 very wasted to the point where I lose control. But usually
Right.
I'm still in control. When it comes to like weed and stuff, I'm just like, I can't even move my body.
Yeah, I think for me the big thing is like, and I'm the exact same way as you. I'm not a huge drinker, but like if I'm going to do anything, it's drinking because I'm just not a drug guy. The difference for me is that I know what drinking 3 or 4 beers will make me feel like.
Mm-hmm.
I have no sense of what having some of an edible or taking a couple hits of a
Because it could be different every time.
Yeah, yeah. You have no idea how it's going to go, and 9 times out of 10, it just results in me wanting to get out of my own body or fall asleep as quickly as possible, so I don't have to feel like that anymore.
Yeah.
And for a long time, I tried to be like, oh no, I'm just like I need to try this or try that. And I was like, why am I imposing this on myself? I don't enjoy it. It makes me incredibly anxious. At some point, every time I'm high, I'm having these weird ideations of like, oh my god, like what if my parents get in a car accident and then they call me, but I'm high, so I can't help them, and I can't like all these horrible things happen where I'm like, why would I continue to do this?
Absolutely, and that is definitely the anxiety that goes with it. It's not worth it. It's not worth it at all. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into this. This is the art of bombing, and this is my favorite part. Is I love hearing the different stories of bombing. So I would love to hear what you got for us.
I think the bomb that sticks out the most for me, it was a situation where there were really no stakes, but it just felt the worst. So I had kind of an interesting way of getting into comedy where I started in college, and then I like had some success there in so much as a person can be successful doing stand-up like at a school. And when I graduated, I had decided like I'm going to be a comedian, but I didn't really know what that meant or what that looked like. And long story short, in my mind, I was like, well, I've been performing at colleges a lot, so at my own college a lot, so it would stand to reason that I could perform at other colleges because that would be an audience that's familiar to me. Why don't I try to get into touring colleges? And I ended up doing that. And very early on, I started having some success with that. So all of this had happened while I was still living with my parents in New Jersey after college, and I hadn't even come to New York and cut my teeth yet. So I decided to move to New York, and I remember going to my first open mic there. And I was so out of touch with how anything worked in real comedy that in my mind, I was like, well, no one knows me here. So if I want to make a good impression, I should do my best material. So I go to this open mic. It was at a hookah lounge it's like First Avenue and First Street. It's called Karma Lounge. I don't think it exists anymore. And I didn't know anybody there. And it was a typical like depressing open mic where everybody seems like they're in a bad mood. No one's looking at each other. And I go up, this like, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed 23-year-old. And I'm like, I'm going to impress these comedians and show them how good I am. And I do a tight 5 of whatever I had been doing at colleges at that time. There might have even been impressions involved, if I'm being honest. So I'm doing like, this is my best stuff. And when I tell you that there was not a sound, there was not a single sound for 5 minutes. It's a 5 minutes that felt like an hour in the worst possible way, where it was so bad that it felt like a prank. Like it felt like I had walked into a scenario where before I got there, everyone was like, hey, this guy's going to show up. When he gets up there, don't react at all. Don't laugh. Don't say anything.
The ultimate college gag.
And Right. Yeah. It's like, but it's like, I can't believe I'm quoting a Lumineers song, but when they say like the opposite of love's indifference, like that was how it would have not felt as bad if someone had even said that I sucked. It was just that people were, I think, a combination of just flabbergasted that someone would be so out of touch that they would go up at a shitty open mic and try to do whatever their version of a late night set was.
Mm-hmm.
But also just people being like, I don't know who the fuck this guy thinks he is, but no one here is going to give him the satisfaction of, like, he clearly thinks he knows what he's doing, and fuck that. Like, that was the general vibe.
It's time that he gets some reality checks in comedy.
Yeah.
Was there an audience, or was it just mostly comics?
All comics.
All comics, yeah. And that's one thing,
and
too.
Comics, I don't know if you know this, they can be petty and mean.
Oh, yeah, right? Absolutely. Well, and when you're the new person, when they don't know you or even, know your history, if you have any history in comedy, whether it's locally or not, unless you have a bunch of credits or whatever, that kind of thing, like, I feel like there's so much more judgment, too, because they look at, you come in, and you've been doing comedy, so it's not like you're new or a total noob. You come in with some experience, but they look at you as, oh, who's this new guy? And then when you try to like be a professional, it's like, well, now this guy can really go screw himself.
Well, and I think looking back on it, like fundamentally, what was happening was that the only place I had really done comedy, other than like a handful of random rooms in New Jersey, was at my own college and for other college students, right? So you're talking about doing shows for people who are not discerning comedy fans, especially back then. This is like 2010, 2011. This is before everybody had comedy clips in their face every 2 seconds on Instagram. Like for a lot of people at a college gig, it's their first time being at a live comedy show. So it's exciting for them, and they're not jaded because they're 18-year-old college students. So to go from the least jaded audience to the most jaded, which is a room full of comedians who have been like grinding it out in New York, it was just a perfect collision of worlds that did not work in my favor. And I remember initially being kind of indignant about it, where I after leaving, I remember feeling like, these people don't know anything. Like, I'm out, I'm doing headlining sets at colleges. Like, I know that I'm good. I know how to get laughs. And I was frustrated. And then I think a couple weeks went by of being in New York where I actually saw what a real open mic was like. And I was like, it was mean, but I get it. Like, that's how I would react if I saw that and I had been in New York for a while. And I was like, oh no, I think they were mostly right. Yeah. I don't suck, but like, I'm not a New York comic. I'll tell you that much. I haven't earned their respect. So
yeah, I felt that way, and I kind of run into this a lot when I was talking about when you're the new person, because I've moved around a lot and been in different scenes, and for me, I always give the comparison as every time you change a comedy scene, it's like moving to a new high school as well too. Right. So everybody's immediately like kind of like standoffish already, and with comedy, it's funny because they're just like, who's this new guy? Even you could have all the credits in the world, and they might have that attitude of, who is this guy and who does he think he is coming in here, whatever.
Right. Yeah, and I think the other part of it too, as I got to know people, was that there was a certain amount of resentment because I was this like young guy who I had not paid my dues, and I was already out making money doing comedy, albeit in a very specific niche within comedy. But I think some people didn't like that, and it's not like I was arrogant or anything like that, but if you're 30 and you've been grinding it out in New York for 10 years and you're still not getting any headway, and then this kid comes in who's like, you have no idea who it is, and he's somehow out
doing colleges,
making money. Yeah. Like, and I remember people being very passive aggressive about it. And some of the things people would say, I get why, but it was these kind of jabs of like, oh, I can see why you do well at colleges. Like, your stuff is very non-threatening, or like you're not very edgy, or you don't do this, you don't do that. And it's like, okay, but it is shitty.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it's funny with comedy too, because you do run into that a lot, where it's all about especially with older people, it's all about paying the dues, and if you do anything to fast track a career, then that right there just gives you a certain amount of disrespect from people because they're like, well, you didn't grind it out, Well,
Yeah.
good. Lucky me. I'm glad.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I feel on the other side of it now, as someone who is part of a different generation of comedy than who's coming up now. Of course, there are times where you see someone who has 8 million followers on TikTok and they're headlining a club, and you're like, well, what the hell? Like this person's 20 years old and they've barely done stand up, if at all.
Yep.
Of course, there's a certain resentment there, but at the same time, to your point, good for them.
Yeah.
You found a way to not have to suffer, to not have to go through all of this. And I do think that a certain amount of going through those tough years does form you. It does make you stronger. But am I happy that I had to? I don't know. I mean, I'm happy that I turned out to be a comedian, that I feel like I'm proud of my work, but it's like, yeah, I'm not like thrilled that I had to be miserable a lot of that time.
No, absolutely. I mean, and that's one thing that's funny about comedy too. Comedians really like to torture themselves.
Oh yeah,
it's like we hate ourselves. We go to these open mics where, there's, you like said, if there's an audience, that's amazing. But usually it's just other comics that are just hating on us while we're on stage or not paying attention. You got that aspect of it. So then we do these terrible gigs for no money and
right. But that was an important realization too, was that after a certain amount of being in New York and doing mics, I realized it's not so much people actively disliking you, it's that they're so much in their own heads that they're just not even aware of what you're doing. Like most open mics in New York, at least half of the people there are thinking about what they're going to do when they get their 2 minutes, or looking through their notes or whatever it might be. So I learned to not take it personally, but
I've seen some comics,
so that's
new comics that, like, it would be like their very first open mic or whatever, and they would get so offended because the other comics weren't like paying attention, or they would not even be in the room, and it was always interesting to me because they just didn't know. It was not them being naive, but you try to explain, it's like, because they're comics, they're not here to support you, they're just waiting for their time. They're just waiting to get up here, and right now you're in their way. They're still waiting and you're up here, so
right. And so many of the mics that I used to do were bucket mics, where it's like everybody's name is in the bucket, they pull 5 names, they read the next 5 people, and so when you get on stage, most of the people are just thinking about how annoyed they are that they have to wait until the next group and the next group and the next group.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's like the waiting is the worst part for like opening, especially them bucket list open mics. I get why they do it, because they want to keep people there, and hopefully the comics will spend a little money on drinks or whatever, and that's what they're hoping to get something out of that. Or the idea is that, well, if you're here, you're going to be supporting your colleagues and whatever, but that's not the case, because you're still in your head thinking about your set and what you're going to do if and when you finally get drawn.
Yeah.
But
I haven't done one in a long time, but one thing I've seen that I do like at bucket mics is there was a mic where whoever was in that last group of names pulled, they got to go first the following week. So that's a nice way to be like, hey, sorry this sucked, but like, we got you next time.
Yeah. I like the idea too, though, of them drawing multiple names at a time, like doing it in groups, because a lot of the bucket mics that I've been to, it's just been like, here's the first comic, and then they'll draw who's going to be on deck, essentially. So then once they get it going, it's like, all right, we know who's coming up next, but on deck is whoever they draw. So it's like one at a time. Right. That at least gives you a little bit of time to prepare if your name gets drawn. You have a little more time to get ready to go up there.
Yeah, exactly.
But
yeah, that's the main bombing story. I have a couple others if you want them, but I don't
absolutely
know where we're at with time. So these I would put in the category of not so much bombing as getting scolded on stage. This happened in two separate occasions. The first one was at a college. It was I'll name names. I don't think they'll have me back. It was a school called Anna Maria College in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I think the only guidelines I had been told were like they want you to keep it cleaner, but you never know what that means. Like
Yeah,
it
'cause
was,
they're not
I
very
guess it was
specific.
it was a religiously affiliated college, but like that means different things to different people. So maybe it means don't swear, maybe it means don't talk about sex, maybe it means some combination of all of that. So I don't even remember the joke exactly, but maybe like 10 minutes into an hour-long set, I made some sort of joke about, I think I remember what it was, and it's probably not a joke that I would do anymore. But the joke was that I was afraid that I had been like inadvertently racist as a child because like the rainbow sprinkles you put on ice cream. I always grew up like in Illinois, we called them Jimmies, like that's what they were called. And I don't know if you've heard that.
I haven't heard that.
Countries. So we called them Jimmies, and then the joke was, but I used to call the chocolate ones Jamals. Uh-oh. So it's like a stupid joke, fairly innocuous. Like it's not horrible. And the advisor I was on, it was like a small theater, and the advisor walks up to the stage in the middle of my set and like beckons me over. So I'm like holding microphone. I put the microphone down. I walk over to her, and she like loudly enough that everyone can hear, just like accosts me. It was like, we told you this had to be a clean show. That means like no race, no sex, no whatever. And like gave me a stern talking to, and then walked to the back of the room. So I don't really know how to react to this. So I take the microphone. I didn't say anything like about her specifically, I don't think, but I feel like I just did one of those like, well, that was interesting. I guess I'll keep going. And so I did the rest of the show. And after the show, they refused to pay me. They did not pay me for the show. And my agent, and this was like, I still resent her for this. She wouldn't go to bat with them because she was like, well, you know, we do a lot of other business with them, and I'm not trying to like compromise my other business. So like, it is what it is.
Wow. So, what a terrible
and this is like,
agent.
Like a $1,500 gig. Like it was not like, colleges pay pretty well.
Yeah.
And the thing that bothered me the most about it was that if you're so offended by what I've said, stop the fucking show.
Yeah.
Like
right.
if you're not going to pay me, don't let me do another 50 minutes. And then after the fact, be like, you breached the contract. We're not paying you. And also if that joke is so objectionable, book a fucking balloon artist. Like don't have comedy at your school.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing if you're very specific about like, look, these are the parameters. We need someone who's squeaky clean. If you can do that, great. And if not, you know, it's not going to work out.
We need to go a different direction.
Yeah, because my thing, like, I don't like it when comics get upset about restrictions if they agreed to do the gig knowing that.
Yeah.
Like if you get offered a gig and it's clear what the parameters are, if you don't think you can or will do that, that's on you as a professional to say, I can't do that. Yeah. So don't do the thing where you're like, oh, I'm an artist, I'm going to go say what I want. It's like, well, if that's not what you were hired to do, then that's not really how that works.
Yeah. And to me, anytime I see a comic do that, where they'll agree to do like a clean show, whatever it is, have the parameters, and then they go in there and they're like, well, I'm supposed to be clean, but blah, F that, you know, and they just immediately go into there. I'm just like, why'd you do the gig? You know, like that's... You're
allowed to say no to things.
Yeah, and saying no is a very powerful tool. You know, like having that power and ability is a very good, you know, tool to have. We don't need to take every gig because now, you know, and when comics do that, especially in like a corporate setting or you know whatever, you're not going to get asked back, and it's easy to forget as comedians that you know companies and like. Corporate entertainment bookers and college bookers, and they do communicate, you know, like they do look for referrals, and if they're looking at you, you know, you as a comic to come into their school, they might do some references, and then they find out, oh, he agreed to do clean, but just totally did the opposite, and we decided not to pay him. You've lost all kinds of business and potential bookings.
But sadly, that was not the only time that happened. It happened at a corporate event. I was down in, I think it was in D.C., and it was a similar sort of thing where like they asked me to do stand-up. They told me they wanted to be clean. in this case, I kind of take the blame because I think it was one of those times where like the set was going really well. I was feeling myself and I was like, you know what, these people like me. Like I can push it a little bit. And it's a bit of hubris. There was some Icarus flying too close to the sun sort of things going on. But the worst thing, I mean, I was young at this time too. So the jokes weren't even that good. But the premise of the joke was that I had been teaching tennis lessons to kids, and that the kids found out that I was a comedian, and then they just thought that meant they could tell me jokes all the time. So it was like me repeating jokes that I had heard from kids. And the first one was a little kid asks why was 6 afraid of 7, and I was like, well, I know that one. It's because 7, 8, 9. And he goes, no, because 6 is a little bitch. And I was like, oh, okay. So, it's like, that's pushing it, just saying the word bitch. But then the other one was, I'm trying to see if I remember this. It was, why can't Miss Piggy count to 70? And the answer was because every time she gets to 69, she gets a frog in her throat, which it's like a bad street joke.
Yeah.
And so I did that joke, and the CEO of the company, like I could see him get up from his seat and he walks like around the back of the stage. And it was a similar sort of thing to the college where in the middle of I think it was like a half-hour set, he like kind of beckons me backstage. And so now everyone's probably 200 people just sitting there looking at an empty stage. I go back, he like freaks out at me. And then it's the same thing where he sends me back out to finish the set. I don't know why that happened multiple times. And I finished the set. And then after the show, I ended up like going out with some of the people who were there. And all of them were like, that was so inappropriate. Like not to me, but like what our boss did was like, they were like, that is insane that he did that. Like, we're so sorry that happened to you. You were great. Like no one was offended by what you said. It's not, you don't have anything to worry about. But it was the sort of thing where they had paid me 50% up front, and then they're supposed to pay me the remaining 50% after. And like a week goes by and I haven't gotten paid, and 2 weeks, and then a month. And so like they're ghosting me basically. And so finally I reach out to them, and the woman who booked it sends me this email like, hey, what you did at that conference was really unprofessional. You've caused a lot of stress for me in my job. It's on me because I booked you, and blah, 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 blah. And, go talk to this other person. And so I call this guy who I guess was in their like accounting department or payroll or whatever the hell. And I still remember he was just so fucking condescending. Like, I think it was a sort of thing where maybe the whole gig was supposed to be like $5,000 or something like that. And they paid me $2,500 up front, and I was waiting for $2,500 more. And I remember him being like, I was saying like, you're not fulfilling the contract. And he's like, look, you ruined the show. We already gave you $2,500. Like, as far as we're concerned, that's a pretty good amount of money for telling a couple jokes. And he like hung up on me. Yeah.
And then he hung up on
and it was
you.
one of those, yeah. And it was one of those, like, what am I going to go to small claims court with this company? Like,
yeah.
What recourse do you have at that point? But it was, he made a point to be like, I have no respect for what you do. And, you should be grateful that we gave you anything.
Oh, wow. That's, man. I mean, it's one of them situations where you want to be like, I can't believe people are like that. But then people, and it's like, well, also not surprised that people are like that.
Yeah. And as far as awful. Like the woman, I genuinely do feel bad if me doing that or me like crossing a line ended up affecting her negatively, or then like moving forward, nobody trusts her to book somebody for, like, that's not what I'm trying to do. But
oh, absolutely.
It's not like I was up there saying the N-word or like doing something insane. Like, it was, I shouldn't have done those jokes probably, but it felt somewhat extreme. And again, same thing as the other story. Like, if what I've said is so bad, why are you letting me finish?
Yeah, exactly. You would think that they would just want to stop it right there, and just be done with it. But that's still crazy that in 2 different instances you got like scolded in the middle of your set. Like that to me, like, that's,
and it's particularly funny because like I'm a pretty clean comic too.
I mean, but the idea that people are just, well, I'm just going to go take care of this now. And in those situations, after they scolded you or accosted you and then whatever, were they're like, now please don't, do any more material, or it was just kind of like more of a, just basically chewing you out?
I guess both. I my memory of it was kind of like chewing me out and then sending me back out there with a like, hey, don't
do it again.
Don't screw up the rest of it. Yeah, but
wow.
Because how do you recover from that? It's such an awkward thing.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's those moments where you just want to crawl out of your skin and disappear, where you're like, I'm so humiliated, and you just feel that like flop sweat creeping up in your body.
Mm-hmm. I mean, as comedians, the comedian in you just wants to like go even lean in and
just roast them,
and just roast them, and just be, just be
burn
like,
it all down.
Yeah, just burn it all down. It's like just lash out at the teacher that scolded you in front of the class. Mm-hmm. Let them have it, kind of situation. But then the professional in us is like, wow, I can't do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and in both cases, it had the vibe of like a parent scolding a kid, like, hey, you knock it off.
Mm-hmm.
And it was mortifying.
So awkward too. Wow.
Incredibly
now,
awkward.
I mean, obviously, you kind of knew what happened in those scenarios. I got follow up on the one with the college. I'm curious because you said the manager or your agent didn't go up to bat for you because they're afraid of losing money. After that, did you switch agencies? Not
as soon as I should have, but ultimately I did. Yeah.
Yeah, because I feel like if they're only worried about what the money that they're making, that's not good. Because also it's their job when they're getting you booked and doing these contracts that it's all clear, like what the parameters of the show are. Like that should have been if they're representing you and they're getting these bookings and solicitations, they should have been communicating with the event coordinator at the college to get the logistics and the parameters and all of that. So to me, they failed in that aspect, and then even more so by not coming to your defense.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty shitty, but it's not surprising knowing like kind of what that market is like, and it's one of those where even if she was actually too honest, like I would rather her have been like, look, I'll do my best, and then maybe she doesn't even try. But the fact that she just blatantly was like, yeah, I do a lot of business with this school. I'm not trying to fuck up my own bag, as the kids say.
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. Did with that, like when you got your agent doing colleges, were you able to get that like right away from, because you said you started, your comedy career kind of started with doing colleges because you started in your own college. Yeah. Did you get that before you were getting into colleges, or did that come a little bit after?
An agent?
Yeah, for the college stuff, yeah.
Yeah, it kind of came hand in hand. Like the way it worked for colleges was that this is long enough ago that I made physical press kits and like mailed them to, like I mailed a DVD and a cover letter to various agencies. I think anything that I lacked in actual talent or knowing how to do comedy, I had gone to school for communications. Like I knew how to do like a PR campaign, and I kind of just did one for myself to see what would happen. And in most cases, people ignored me or didn't respond, or they responded and were like, who are you? Also, you're 22 and super green. Like, we're not going to represent you. But there were a couple people who did this sort of thing where they were like, we're not going to represent you, but if you want to submit for conferences through us, it's NACA conferences, like these big college conferences. Yep. So
still going.
They were like, we'll submit you if you get selected. We'll represent you at the college, and like maybe we'll work with you beyond that. So that's kind of how I got a foot in the door.
Okay, so they kind of helped you get into NACA, or kind of. I mean,
or help
you
submit. Yeah, it's like the like being hip pocketed when someone's like, you're not on our roster, but we're gonna see how it goes, and then if it goes well, we'll
add you to the roster. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess that kind of makes sense. But I was curious if you did have to still go through the NACA, that's where I was really curious about, because that that's that in itself,
especially at that time, they
process.
were the gatekeepers. Oh, big time, yeah.
Oh my God, it's crazy and expensive. I think too. Like it costs a lot of money to go.
Very expensive.
Do
Very expensive.
one of those conferences. So yeah,
right. And if you want to go on your own without an agency, you're spending thousands of dollars. And I mean, who has that at 22?
Oh yeah, well, who has that really in any part of their career unless they're selling out clubs and theaters and doing TV. And by then it doesn't matter because they're coming to you whether they're not looking for you at NACA. Exactly. They're trying to get you because you already have that name. Now, going back to those stories that you told, obviously you kind of knew what happened with those shows, but when when you have a bad set and you're looking back on kind of what went wrong, how do you kind of analyze that to try to figure out, oh, I need to tweak this and, avoid doing this in the future?
Well, I think at this stage of my career, I've been doing it long enough that I can usually tell if it's my fault or if it's not. Like there are times where it truly is just not a good environment for comedy and or the crowd is just shitty that night. And that's not to say that there's not something that one could have done to like make the set go better. But I think usually I pinpoint it to like a moment during which I lost the crowd and didn't recover. And I think one of the things I learned early on was like, you have to earn the respect of the audience in order to tell certain jokes that might be a little edgier or riskier, because like if you just come in hot with that off the top, people like, we don't know who you are. Yep. You have not like established that you're funny yet, so we're not going to go with you on this journey. It's something I have a joke in my set that I'm doing right now where it's like, I only really tell it if it's clear to me that people really like me and I've done at least 10 minutes before it. Because if I start with it, I know for a fact that people are not going to, it's like, I need them to know who I am before I get to that. Because if they know who I am and they're like, oh, this seems like a good guy and he's funny and we trust him, then they'll take that ride. But until then, it won't happen. And the other thing that I learned was, I don't do like a ton of stuff about race, but when I do, I realized that I had to preface what I was doing with establishing that I am not a white male, like that I'm biracial, and not that gives me carte blanche to like talk about whatever I want as I move this cat from my desk. But
that's be part of the show.
Exactly.
I'm gonna say that's not the first animal that's wanted to be on this podcast.
I'm sure it's not. But yeah, so I think there are certain things you have to earn, and I found that to be the case for sure at colleges, where it was like, if I did some sort of joke where I had an opinion about something racial, people did not react to it well unless they knew that I was not just like some Italian guy saying that.
You got to make sure that there's a little diversity going in your ethnicity. Exactly. Like, wait a minute, can you really? No. You're right. I mean, going back to that, it really breaks down to like establishing that trust, and that's what's great about being able to do longer sets. You get more time to really hone in, and you get more time to stretch. So you get that time for them to get to know you, and then you can do that stuff where like when you're doing shorter showcase sets or open mics, it's harder to work out the material that might be a little more risky, if you will, because you're right. They gotta like you, and they gotta know, at least have a sense of who you are as a person.
Yeah, and I also think I enjoy doing stuff that's more like storytelling-ish sometimes. And if you have a joke that's a 5-minute bit, are you really going to spend half of your 10-minute set doing it? Like, maybe not. But if you're doing 45 minutes, sure.
Yep. No, absolutely. Now, when you're on stage and you feel like you're starting to lose the audience, kind of what goes through your mind in that moment, and how do you decide how you're going to deviate and try to win them back?
Well, I think you're always making that calculation of like where you stand at any given moment. And I also think it's something that comes with experience, where you just have a feel. Like sometimes even before you go on stage, you're like, I have a sense that this crowd is a little weird, or that there's like a pocket of the room that's been a little problematic. So you kind of just inherently know how to prepare yourself for that. Usually what I do, if I lose them at some point, the move is like, how do I get people back as quickly as possible? And sometimes that's with a joke that I know works or something that I can like pull out at any given moment that will be effective. Sometimes it's something self-deprecating. I think that's like a fairly easy crutch to use if people are not feeling what you're saying. And I don't like to overuse that. Like it actively bothers me when I watch a set and anytime there's not a huge reaction, the comic's like, oh, I guess you guys didn't like that one. It's like, we don't need the director's commentary. Like, it makes it feel unprofessional when you're commenting on how it's going the whole time. But I think if you do it sparingly and you do it in the right way, it can be effective. Where I think there's a kind of a stock line that I use where if I've told a bunch of jokes and most of them work, and then there's one that people have no reaction to, sorry for the siren here. Nope. I can pause for a second, but
getting the real New York feeling.
Yeah, exactly. But I'll use that as an opportunity to turn it around. And because I think anytime you're combative with the audience and you're like, hey, fuck you guys for not laughing, it doesn't help in most cases. So what I do is I turn it around to make it a compliment where I'm like, you know what? I really respect the fact that you guys are judging me on a joke by joke basis. Like you liked most of them and that one, not so much. And I respect you for having that conviction. And like that sort of thing, I think usually makes people be like, oh, okay, this person's self-aware enough that they're acknowledging that we didn't like that joke and let's all move on.
Yep. And I think that's very important too. And I think it definitely helps build even more trust because when, you're right, you got to do it sparingly. You can't just do a complete commentary on the whole set or whatever. But to me, it's always so awkward when a comic just does something and it just doesn't land. And instead of like addressing the elephant in the room, they're just like, well, just, they say nothing and try to go into a next joke. And then the crowd's confused.
Yeah,
they're
is
like,
odd.
They're like, did he think that was funny? Like, did they think that was good or what's going on here? And then they stop listening because totally now they're thinking about what just happened.
Right.
And as soon as they check out, you lose your audience even more. I'm curious for you, especially because you didn't kind of have the traditional, I was going to say upbringing, but not upbringing, but traditional grind.
Comedy upbringing?
Upbringing. There you go. Comedy upbringing.
Yeah.
You didn't have to go through the ranks of all the open mics right away. So how early on, and even now, like what was your writing process like, and how has that kind of evolved over the years?
Well, what I've reflected on is that doing the college gigs that I did and then coming to New York after that, there was like good and bad from that experience. The positive is that at a time long before I was ready to be doing a long set, I was out doing 45 minutes or an hour sometimes, and I just had to make it work. It was like, well, I've been booked here. I've told people that I can do this much time. I guess I better figure out a way to do it. And so I think that made my stage presence really good because I was just operating so much on charisma and like being likable more so than actually having a good act at that time. But the other side of that coin was that by virtue of me trying to stretch everything out into a 45-minute or hour set, I got to New York and I learned about word economy very quickly, where I was like, oh, some of these jokes I have that are 4-minute jokes could be 30 seconds. And I've just dragged them out for no reason. I've got all these extra things that don't bring anything to the table. So my writing process has always been, I have never in 15 years of doing comedy been the sort of person who like wakes up and free writes in my notebook every morning. It's just not, I write as I
wish
go.
I could be.
Like, I guess so, but I mean, everyone's process is their process. Yep. Like, and Gary Gulman is someone who I've worked with before and I admire a lot, but like his process seems so exhausting. I couldn't do it. Like he will write down a transcript of every word of every joke that he has. And he will go through like a copy editor and be like, do I need this joke here? What could be funny? It's like a math equation to him.
Oh,
and
wow.
He's an amazing comic. But I feel like my style is just kind of looser than that in general. So my process generally is, and it's always been the same, if I think of something, I will write it down, whether it's like on the notes app in my phone or on a piece of paper, whatever it is. And then I always work it out on stage. Like sometimes I'll bring it on stage and it's just a thought. Other times it's more of a fully formed idea and I have a feeling that it's going to work. But yeah, 99% of every joke I've ever written is something that I like had an idea for, or something happened to me that I thought was funny. And then I just brought it on stage and chipped away at it.
And for you, what's the evolution or the timeline when you have the idea, you bring it on stage and you're working it out, where you decide, oh, this just isn't ready to go in the main act, or it is ready and you put it in the act?
Well, I think I've gotten better at knowing what will and won't be funny. Like, I think early on, I just hadn't been in front of enough audiences to discern, like, is this something that's funny just to me, or is this actually relatable and funny to everyone? So I think I'm already coming in at a point where if I write something, I'm pretty sure it's going to work. But then the question is like, okay, if this joke is 60% done, how do I know when it's done and ready to be part of the act? But I think now my move, and a lot of comics do this, is like you sandwich the new stuff in between stuff that works. So if I'm doing a club set, especially when I'm getting paid and I feel a certain responsibility to do really well, if I have a new bit, first of all, I'll never do something that I'm trying out for the first time at a club show. Like at this point, I don't really do mics, but doing a bar show kind of has taken that place for me. So that's where I work a lot of it out. And then, I don't know, usually I have a pretty good sense of when something is done and it's like ready to be promoted to the big leagues. But I also think that some of the fun of being a comic is that you're always finding new stuff. Like even if you think a joke is done, you might have some comic be like, oh, that's really funny, but like, can I give you another tag or this or that? And I think one thing that I've been doing recently when I feel like I'm not writing as much as I would like to is I'll go back and re-examine old jokes from 3, 4, 5 years ago. And it's been really effective because it's still good material, because it's not like I was a schmuck 5 years ago, but I'm that much better now that there are certain jokes where I'm like, oh, I thought that joke was done and there's so much more I could have gotten out of it. So now I'm going to approach it with 5 more years of experience. And like, I know how to have all these secondary and third and fourth tags and, or a new angle. There are even things where I had a joke that worked, but I never had the ending that I wanted for it. It was much like many SNL sketches. It was like really funny, and then it just ended abruptly, and you were like, well, that was kind of unsatisfying. So I realized that the end of the joke that I had 5 years ago could now serve as a callback for something else that I have in my act now that relates to it. But 5 years ago, that other joke didn't exist, so it wouldn't have occurred to me. So that's I think how I do it. But most of the time it's like adding as much new stuff as I can and removing. There's always the pecking order of like, this is a good joke, but I'm really sick of doing it. So I'm pushing it down on the list. And as soon as I have another 5 or 10 minutes that I can replace this with, I will do that. But at the same time, like, I'm not Louis C.K. Nobody's asking me to have a new hour every year. Yeah. So right? I try not to have that sort of pressure on myself.
I feel
but
like
I still
that's
feel
a lot
it. Like
of
if I
pressure,
do
too.
a headlining set, it's an insane amount of pressure, especially when no one's asking for it. Like it's one thing if you are at that level where people want to see your new stuff that much, but even at that level, it's still a lot of pressure. For that. It's a ton of pressure, and it's frankly not a realistic standard to set for oneself. Like if you can do it, amazing. But I think 99% of comedians, even very high level comedians, it takes longer than that. And I think that's usually why you see people when they break, their material sometimes goes downhill a bit, because it's like, if you break based on your first special, and that special was the culmination of 10 years of work, and now you have a name and people are like, hey, that was great. Can we have another one 8 months from now? Well, you took 10 years to make the first one. So the next 8 months is probably not going to produce as good of a special. I mean, I think that's like when I look at Dane Cook, say what you will about the guy, but that first album, Harmful If Swallowed, is hilarious. And then his second album, and I think it was arrogance on his part, is a double album. It's like 2 hours of material that probably could have been condensed into like a good 45, but for whatever reason, there was a demand for it. And he's like, well, if the people want it,
we'll
sure.
put it out there. Yeah.
And it just kept going downhill, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And that definitely, that happens a lot, it feels like. And I couldn't imagine. Obviously, as comedians, we want to keep, progressing and getting better. And eventually, hopefully we break and, we get all that big fame and stuff. But I look at it where I'm like, I don't know if I want that much fame. That's a lot of pressure that I don't know that I want.
Oh no. I say that all the time. Like when I think about the dream career that I would have, like, let me be Kyle Kinane, you know what I mean? Like I don't need to be Aziz Ansari. I don't need to be John Mulaney. Like, yeah, that's nice, but like I do not want a level of fame where my life changes in any way. Like it seems like too much.
Yeah, a lot of pressure for sure. Well, we're going to start wrapping up. I got one more. I got a few more questions, but I'm curious about when you went from, performing at colleges and then you moved to New York and you started doing mics and showcases. How hard was that to go from doing 45 minutes to an hour and then now you're like, oh, now I got to start doing like 5-minute sets? Because even now, like, where, I've been doing comedy for quite a while, and either, for the most part, most of the gigs I do, I either feature a headline. And if I go to a mic or I do like a 5-minute spot, it's like, oh my God, how am I going to do 3 minutes when I'm used to doing an hour?
Well, I think, it was tough, especially some of the mics that I used to do in New York were literally 2-minute mics. You could do like a joke and then that was it. And I think it helped that I was as young as I was, so I was willing to like eat some shit sandwiches, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about the kind of lifestyle that I had and what I put myself through, I don't think that I would be willing to do that in my 30s. Like I think that it was necessary at that time, but the idea of it now, it just seems miserable. But I don't know. I think I looked at it as an opportunity to get better. And I also, even though initially maybe I was like, oh, these people don't know what they're talking about, I know that I'm funny. I think in New York and in a lot of scenes, but especially New York, you are surrounded by people who are so good. Even at the lowest levels, like at open mics, I remember seeing people, some of whom went on to, be very famous and all that, but like seeing people who I'm like, how have I not heard of this person? That's the funniest thing I've ever seen. And so if that's what you're surrounding yourself with, I kind of feel like you get better through osmosis. Mm-hmm. Like I was learning about how to be a comedian by watching other comedians. Like I attribute so much of my knowledge of comedy to, when I was touring colleges, I just like listened to WTF for hours and like learned about the history of comedy. And then in New York, I would just sit around at mics and I'm learning, even if it's not consciously, I'm like learning about joke structure. I'm learning about tags. I'm learning about crowd work. Like all of these things that then become part of your act that I just hadn't seen before because my view of it was so narrow. Like I was one of 5 people at my college who did comedy. None of us were that great at it. Then I went and performed for college kids, and that's not like a real comedy audience. So I just kind of ate it up. And I think you can look at it 2 ways. Like if you're surrounding yourself with people who are that good, you can come into it and be like, I'm never going to be as good as these people. Like, I don't even know what the point of it is. Or you can approach it from a more ambitious standpoint, which is like, how can I get myself to being at a level where I don't feel out of place amongst these people? And it took a long time. And I'm still not, I'm not in the like upper echelon here. I'm not like working the cellar, but I feel good about the fact that I can say with honesty that I'm peers with people who are doing pretty cool things and that I feel like I can hang. I guess that's the takeaway,
Yep. Oh, that's great. Well, we talk about bombing, so I like to go out more positive. I want to hear about one of your favorite gigs that you've done in your career. Doesn't have to be the best gig, just one of your favorites.
Well, it was cool in the sense that more was asked of me than what I expected. So this was 2011. It was a long time ago. I had just started doing college gigs on my own. And I got an offer to open for Joel McHale at a school, Radford University, near Virginia Tech in Virginia. So I was very excited. I was like a huge fan of the Soup, like Talk Soup and Community. Like I was genuinely like a big fan of Joel McHale's. And so the gig is for like no money. I think they offered me, it was like $500, no travel included. So I was like, I just want to do it because I think it would be a cool story. I get to perform in a basketball arena. So I drive all the way down to Virginia. It's like 8 hours, maybe. It was a long time. And the day of the show, we find out that Joel McHale is having these like crazy, there's some sort of like weather issue. And he was not able to get there. So they were like, we're really sorry, but like the show's not happening. You know, we'll let you know when it's rescheduled, but like, it's just not happening. Right. So I've driven all the way to Virginia and all the way back to not do a show. So they end up rescheduling it for the following weekend. They're like, hey, you know, if you're willing to come down, you can still do the show. Do you want to do it? They're not offering me any more money. So now I'm losing money on this probably. But I still thought it was a cool opportunity. I didn't really know enough to be like, well, maybe, but can you give me more money because I drove all the way down here? So I drive all the way back down again. And now it's like, I don't know, an hour before the show. It's in their basketball stadium. So I think there were, basically they had the stage like where center court was, and then the crowd was just like half of a basketball arena. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we're not talking Madison Square Garden, but probably 2,000-3,000 people, something like that. And about an hour before the show, Joel McHale is still not there. And one of the student activities people comes in. They're like, so we just heard from Joel. He's coming, but his flight is really delayed. He doesn't know when he's going to get here. Definitely won't be in time for when his set is supposed to be. How long can you do? And I was like, by the way, I was supposed to do 15 minutes to open. So I'm like, well, I've been doing colleges on my own. Like, I guess theoretically, the most I could do is like an hour. And they were like, we need you to do an hour. And I was like, okay. And the one thing that I'm happiest about is having had the foresight at that time to be like, when you introduce me, you have to establish that I am doing an hour. Because if you introduce me as the opener, and then people are waiting for Joel McHale, and they think that I'm just going on endlessly for no reason or out of self-indulgence, they're going to turn on me. So you need to, like, you don't have to throw Joel McHale under the bus, but you need to establish, like, hey, you know, Joel's on his way. He's running a little late, but our opener was, you know, kind enough to do a longer set for you. So fortunately, they did that. They, like, set me up for success in that way. But this all happens less than an hour before the show, and I'm 23 years old. I've never performed in a venue even close to that big. I mean, this is like 10 times bigger than any show I've ever done. And it was like the 8 Mile where I'm like, I think I'm going to shit my pants and vomit at the same time. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. But I went out and I just like locked in, and I had like a great set, and I got to feel what it's like to be a stadium act, which is something that I may never get to feel in my life, like people actually coming for me to see me in that sort of venue. But it was like the closest that I have felt to a celebrity. And Joel McHale did finally get there. He came on stage. He was like incredibly magnanimous about, like, you know, keep it going for Adam. He saved the show. He really bailed me out, this and that. And afterwards I got to like hang with him. He like could not be a nicer person. He's like truly one of the nicest guys I've ever met. I did come to find out later that the $500 that I got for doing those two, or, you know, driving down there twice, he got $75,000 for 45 minutes.
Oh,
so just
my God.
Keep that in mind.
Wow.
In retrospect, he maybe should have like thrown me a little something, but I won't hold it against him. But afterwards, like he made a point, like he did a meet and greet, and like he wanted me to come out with him and meet people. And it was one of those, like, in the mind of a person who just saw that show, they don't know that you just met the guy once. Like, you're best friends with him and you're like famous by proxy. Yeah. So it was just a very cool experience to feel like I was put on the spot to do something that I was not prepared to do, and like rose to the occasion and didn't choke.
That's amazing. That is a great cool. Favorite gig for sure. That's awesome. Yeah. It just, we'll get finished up here, but I think it's funny because you mentioned how, you know, you're famous by proxy, and it's so funny how many audience, you know, like people who don't know comedy or whatever, You probably experience this a lot, and we'll probably experience it when we're doing shows together this week, where they just assume that you're on tour together all the time. They're like, "Oh, so do you guys work together all the time? You guys do this? You just travel together?" Like, and we're like, "No, we just met today."
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's great. Well, the last question I like to ask is, we have the Art of Bombing Get Pumped playlist. Doesn't need to be a song that gets you pumped to do comedy, but just a song that gets you pumped for whatever you're about to do. What's a song that gets you pumped?
I'll be honest with you. Call me a basic B, but Industry Baby by Lil Nas X and Jack Harlow. I mean, just a real banger, if you ask me.
Industry Baby.
Something about that background track when it comes in, it's just spicy.
I like it. All right, well, we'll get that added. Well, this has been fantastic. Where can people find you online? Where do you want to direct people listening so they can go find out more about you?
Sure. So all my social media is just my name, which I'm sure will be listed on the episode, but it's Adam Mamawala. I'm sure it's spelled for you as you're listening to this. So ADAMMAMAWALA. That's on Instagram, TikTok. I'm like begrudgingly on TikTok. I don't know. Maybe I'll quit.
I go back and forth on TikTok.
And whoever uses Twitter, I guess you can look me up there too. If you want to see where I'm performing, that's at my website, adammamawala.com/standup. That'll show you the tour dates. And the main thing is, assuming this comes out on Thursday, March 9th, tonight, as you're listening to this, I will be in Vail with you, right?
Yeah. We're going to be at the Vail Comedy Show in Vail, Colorado.
And that's I believe it's called like Bridge Street Bar.
Yeah, I think so. Bridge Street Bar.
Like
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then this Friday and Saturday, so March 10th and 11th, I will be closing out the shows at the Denver Comedy Lounge. So I'll be there for, I think it's 5 shows.
Yep.
And then Sunday I will be in Winter Park, also with Dan. I'm blanking on the name of that. I don't know.
It's called Devil's Craft, I think. Devil's Craft Distillery, I think, is the name of it. Or no, not distillery. Yep. I take that back. It's Devil's Craft Bar and Grill, I think. But
nice. But yeah, so I'll be there. So nice little Colorado run. Other than that, you can look up my other dates. It's a lot of stuff in New York and then wherever else I end up. But that's the main stuff. And if you want to check out either of my albums, buy those on Bandcamp because they give us artists the most money. I have one that came out last year called Statistically More Relatable, and then I have one from a few years ago called One of the Good Ones. The first one is about being married. The second one is about being divorced. So if you want a little taste of both, feel free to check those out. And I think that's enough promo.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Adam, for doing this. This was fantastic.
Of course, man. It's my pleasure.
It's the art of bombing.
And that was our conversation with Adam Mamawala. We hope you enjoyed it. I know it's a fun name to say. I told him that.
I've been saying it all week.
It rolls off the tongue so smoothly too, especially with his first name, Adam Mamawala. It's a smooth name to say, and it's a name that really stands out. Like, people are gonna remember that name because of how it sounds. Like all the syllables and everything. So easy to remember for sure.
That's right. Lots of A. He points this out in the episode about the A's. That's a good takeaway.
Yeah.
Makes
Well, speaking of takeaways, what we have been doing in season 7, if you've been listening to every episode, in the outro, we've been doing takeaways from the conversation where we're taking some points that came up during the show and we're elaborating on it in a post-conversation conversation. But we're going to do a little bit different this week. We're not going to do that in this episode because one thing we noticed is that our outros are becoming very long because we're talking about comedy and getting into it, which we want to do. So instead of doing it now and in the outro, we're revamping Between Bombs. If you remember, Between Bombs is our little mini-series that we do sporadically when we want to talk about comedy topics. But now we're gonna evolve that show into a post Art of Bombing show where we talk about the takeaways that we decided to talk about from the conversation, and that's going to start releasing on Mondays. So you can look for that. Our post-conversation, our takeaways from episode 266 with Adam Mamawala will release on Monday. March 13th. So that is going to be the new format of Between Bombs. It's going to be like a Talking Dead type of show, except we're not going to have guests from the show because we've already talked to the guest.
With special guest Adam Mamawala to talk about the Adam Mamawala.
Yeah.
No, if
We
you're
make
far
the-
enough in the future, you can just sit here and do nothing, and it'll be the next episode that plays. So it could be coming up in a few
we just
seconds.
make them talk about their own. We make them listen to the conversation, and then they have to come up with the takeaways.
There you go.
That would be pretty hilarious. So, yeah, so that's a big announcement. So make sure you tune in to the new formatted Between Bombs starting March 13th, 2023. We've got some fun stuff that we are going to talk about in that episode. We're going to talk about, earning and establishing trust. We're going to talk about how we as comedians focus a lot on the journey of comedy, or, paying your dues, if you will. And, we're going to talk about things that a lot of pros can get away with, but newer comics probably shouldn't try to do. So we got some fun stuff that we're going to talk about on that. So make sure you tune in Monday for that. It's going to be great. And make sure you're following us on all the socials. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. We're on Twitch. We're on YouTube. And we're even going to be starting here in the future. We're going to be releasing more video on YouTube. So make sure you're subscribed to all that. And then you can follow me at dbublitz Comedy on all social media platforms, or visit my website, danbublitz.com. And you can go to find Josh where he would like you to find him, which is
JoshShirleyComedy.com. You'll find all my social channels there and my upcoming dates.
All right, that's going to do it for this week's episode of The Art of Bombing. Thank you guys for listening, and make sure you like, subscribe, and share our content. And we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
This has been a Dan Bublitz comedy production.